kick off. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Sorry, let me just getting pop-ups on my screen. So good morning and welcome. This is the third in a series of 4 culture sprints happening this week. This is part of the Creative Challenge series, and as you can see from the screen, we have a number of fantastic partners that we're doing this series with. I'm just going to start off with just a little bit of admin for everybody. First of all, I think you've already been doing it, which is brilliant. If you can just pop yourselves on mute when you arrive. This is a very informal and interactive session, so we've really encouraged questions throughout. Please just put up your hands, either virtually or physically, pop notes in the chat. If we're sort of mid-flow, we might pause and come back to you, but we will definitely answer your questions, and it's very meant to be very inclusive. So please do keep those questions coming. We've had a bit of a change of plan this morning. We were due to be inviting Amica Dall as our guest speaker, who is founding partner of Assemble. I'm very sad to say that Amica was called away unexpectedly, but we are very lucky because we have had the wonderful David Capener step in, who will be part of our discussion today, along with Madeleine Kessler, who is our chair. So in a moment, I will pass to Madeleine for sort of formal introductions. What we will be doing is Amica was very kind, and she managed to put together a very quick video to answer the questions that we were hoping to share today. So we'll be sending out that video after the session. And also when we get to our challenge section, which is a kind of big part of what we're doing today, we'll be working off a challenge that Amica and I set. So I'll tell you a little bit more about her work then, just to give you in the context, as well as drawing on the experience of David and Madeleine. So to kick us off, I'm going to pass to Madeleine, and then we will kind of talk you through the plan for today.
Hello, it's great to be back, and I'm super excited to be here with David Capener, who, as Kate said, has been doing incredible work with the Irish Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and is how we know one another. So David is a theorist, educator, writer, architect, and designer. He's co-curator and designer of the Irish Pavilion at the Venice Biennale 2021, and his practice critically examines the spaces produced by our contemporary technological condition. He teaches at Birmingham City University and has taught on the master's programme at Queen's University School of Architecture, and is the Belfast School of Architecture at Ulster University. And he's written for the Irish Times, the Guardian, the Sunday Times, and numerous other print and online publications. And I think something I'm really excited to discuss further today, particularly with David, is how he uses all these different forms of practice and of expression to kind of develop his work and ideas. And I think it'll be really exciting, given how everyone here I know is from such amazing different kind of disciplines and backgrounds as well, to really think about collaboration and how we sort of bring this as part of our curation conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you also, Madeleine, for being here and being our chair. It's very nice to have you back. Madeleine was one of our guest speakers on Monday. So I'm just going to quickly run you through the plan for today. So we have just under 2 hours together. That time whizzes by, believe me. So, stay tuned, because we've got an awful lot to get through in the next 2 hours. We are going to start with a bit of a creative icebreaker. That's nothing big and scary. It's just a moment to sort of quickly find out who's in the room and get to know each other. And it really helps with the sort of design creativity process that we're trying to share with you today. Madeleine and David will then have a conversation about their work, and I think that will be a really interesting insight, and a part of what we're really trying to achieve here is this sort of interdisciplinary inspiration. So it will be really interesting to get David and Madeleine's experience and perspective. We'll then have this challenge that we're going to set. So as I said, I'll explain how it will draw on some of the work of Amica Dall, as well as what we've learned from David and Madeleine. We'll work together as a group to workshop a challenge, to apply some design thinking tools and learnings, and really sort of get to grips with how we might collectively solve a problem. It's deliberately designed to be sort of short and sharp, so it's a kind of moment for everyone to dive in and share ideas and leave with some inspiration of how you might apply some of these tools and learnings in your own work and lives. So we'll have a bit of a group discussion at the end, and then we'll draw to a close. And as I said, afterwards, we'll be sending you the video from Amica, but also we'll be working on a toolkit. And I think that's something that's really important about the sessions today, is it's so much more than just today's session. It's going to be brilliant, but we have today's session, we have a series of 4 workshops this week, and then this toolkit that we'll make will really draw together all of those learnings and be used by members of all the communities that we've invited here today to be able to apply in their own practices. So that's something that will be coming your way post session. I'm just going to quickly talk you through some of the principles of design thinking, just for those that aren't familiar with it. In your Eventbrite invite, you'll have had a deck that sort of explained a little bit more about design thinking and the places where we've learned this from. But I'm just going to quickly run you through the general principle, because it really guides us and what we're doing today. So there are these 5 steps with design thinking, and really this is the process that would usually take about a week in a design sprint. So by its nature, what you would tend to do is try and get a mix of really different people that are trying to solve a problem together, lots of different life experience, lots of different, if you're doing it as an organization, you'd want to get lots of different people from different departments and seniority together. You leave all kind of status at the door. It's very much about people and their ideas. And you'd run this through in a week. And obviously today we're just doing it as an exercise in just under 2 hours. So it would always start with empathy. Empathy comes up a lot in the kind of work we've been discussing as part of this Creative Challenge series. It's really about fully understanding the people that you are designing anything for and making sure that it is actually going to be useful to them. And I think that's something that we'll get into in a bit more depth. Defining an issue, so really just letting yourself pinpoint one thing that you're trying to solve. There might be many more things that link to that, and really trying to address those one at a time to just give it a bit of focus and something that feels achievable. The ideation stage is the fun bit, arguably. It's where you can go big and broad with all of your ideas. Usually if you were in a physical room doing this, your room would end up being covered in post-it notes, lots of different ideas springing up. And today that's really kind of part of what we'll be doing is ideation, but we're actually looking a little bit more at the kind of prototyping stage today. And the prototyping and testing in a design sense would be actually making a sort of demo of an object or a service that you're trying to create. So today we'll be thinking about it in terms of the skills of a team and how you might actually go forth and test some of the ideas that we discussed and that we learned from David and Madeline in order to kind of get to something that you can very quickly try out and see if it's viable. And the big thing with design thinking as well is not being fixed by a kind of linear process. You want to keep it quite cyclical. You might have to go back through these stages at sometimes. You have to allow yourself the possibility that you go through this and it doesn't work and you need to go back. And it's about really drawing on all these steps in order to create something that's really valuable for the community that you're designing it for. And just a couple of principles for today. We really encourage you to sort of try and leave any worries at the door, anything you're currently got on your mind, the urgent thing you have to do at lunch. If you can just pop that on pause for the next few hours, because it really helps to be very clear and focused on what we're discussing here together. We really encourage you to share. Nothing is a bad idea. Please just go with your guts, ask a question. Nothing is silly. It sounds a bit of a cliche, but we try and create a bit of a safe space where you can just do, say and do what you need to do in order to understand what we're discussing and your own reaction to it. So really nothing's a bad idea. If we go on a bit of a tangent, I might just ask us to park it and we can come back to that. But that's really just to kind of keep us focused because we have only a set amount of time. Challenge assumptions. This is really important. I think it's a really helpful process to go through of keep questioning where your assumption has come from. As a group, when you start discussing things, it's always good to ask, are we making any assumptions here? And it just means that you keep quite open-minded and comes back to that point about empathy. And finally, we really encourage you to be as optimistic as you can be. And now actually I feel like people are becoming more optimistic. We've had a really tough time lately, of course. You have to be realistic about the situation and the parameters that you're being asked to discuss, of course, but just be as optimistic as you can. Assume, again, that factor assuming, assume that what you're saying could work rather than why it couldn't work, and try and sort of really encourage each other to sort of share ideas and think about the positive outcomes, and that just helps normally unlock some of the creativity that we want to talk about. So I will just stop sharing my screen there for a moment. And I will pass over to Madeline to take us through our Q&A.
Thank you, Kate. I was actually wondering if it might be nice to go around the room again to introduce everyone to David and their backgrounds.
I've jumped yeah, we need to do our creative icebreaker. Thanks, Madeline. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, for this, what we thought might be helpful is we definitely want to hear from you. Obviously, it's great if you can turn your camera on so we can see you, but if your camera's not working, that's fine, just to do it by audio. And not only do we want to hear who you are, why you're here today, you know, what your specialism is, but also we like to sort of make it a little bit more creative. And actually, again, based on our kind of original plan with Amica, we asked her what does she like to do in her spare time. And what's really interesting was that one of the things she mentioned was an interest in reading, but also in translation. And what I loved about this when then we invited David to join was because David and Madeline have been working over in Venice so much together lately on a big international project. It made sense that we talk about inspiration from other languages and cultures. So what I wanted to do as a way to introduce yourself is to have a think about a piece of art, maybe a book, a film, an artwork that you love, that might kind of represent you in some way, but that has come from a different culture or ideally a different language. So my example is the film Amelie. I love the film Amelie. I just think it's very beautifully shot, but also I really like it because it tests my French, which is very bad, but I sometimes try and sit and listen and read to it actually fully in French. And I think it kind of says a lot about how I might see the world. So for me, I would pick Amelie, the film, and really encourage you all to watch it. And I will ask both of our guest speakers to have a think about this and introduce themselves, and then we will go around the room so we can hear from you as well. So Maddie, what would be your inspiration from a different culture or language?
Well, I think my inspiration would definitely be the Hieronymus Bosch painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights, which I don't know if that's perhaps cheating slightly, but it has actually sort of informed our whole project at the British Pavilion in Venice. And this is a painting that was done by a Dutch painter sort of hundreds of years ago. And it's just absolutely incredible. The more you look into it, the more kind of weird scenes you see. And I think I just love that kind of abstraction and how it's sort of helped us to take a step back and view the world in a different way.
Brilliant. David, if you wouldn't mind saying hello and sharing an inspiration for yourself.
Hi, how's it going, everyone? It's really good to see you all. I'll give you an insight, is I absolutely hate those questions because my mind just goes, which I'm sure in conversation with Maddie will start to make sense with how I work. And so I could probably pick 1,000 ones and I can't pick one right now. Yeah. That's sorry.
No, nothing is wrong here. So you're absolutely allowed to stand by that. That's completely fine. So I'm just going to go around the room and just invite you to just say hello and share your idea. Jenny, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, so for me, it's many things. It's mostly from the Italian culture, just because it was also the first foreign language I learned. So I'm very connected to it. But the first thing that came to my mind is the Laocoon and his sons sculpture that is in Vatican now. I came across a museum recently that is very close to LSE, and there was I forgot the name now. It was the house of Sir John. He was a sculptor, and he collected all these pieces from all over the world, and it's just amazing because he opened up the house museum, and the sculpture of Laocoon and his sons was there, like a mini version, because the real one is in Vatican. And it inspires me because it's related to like how we in the society the truth is always silenced, and his death represents that. So
wow, that's a brilliant one. Thank you so much. Thank you. Sean, good morning. Would you like to introduce yourself and share an idea?
Good morning. My name's Sean Farron, and I sort of work across LSE Aspect and Shape. So yeah, it's brilliant to sort of pop in and see you all, and thank you so much also, David, for joining me, Madeline, to see you again. Yeah, I suppose for me, I grew up partly in the South Pacific, and there's a sort of artwork there called tapa, which is basically made on a bark with different patterns on it. And it always fascinates me because the different tapa patterns speak about sort of a cultural identity. And I suppose combining art and social psychology, which is the two areas I largely work in, I just have always found it really fascinating about these kind of patterns of identity and how then that gets relayed on a literal visual geometric basis, which was just super interesting for me. So I did have one somewhere, but I have no idea where it's gone actually. So
thank you.
Yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Matthew, welcome back. You were here earlier this week. Do you want to introduce yourself again and share what your inspiration would be?
Hi, so I'm Matthew, and I recently graduated from the University of Kent. I'm an internet arts daily, and I guess I'm from Tanzania in East Africa, and I guess I would say my interest, something that inspires me that's not from my culture, I guess would be there's these paintings by a Japanese painter called Hiroshi Nagai, which he made in the 1980s. So this whole movement of like Japanese city pop, which took inspiration from the pop that was going on in the US and stuff at the time. So they're very sort of minimalist type pieces, and yeah, I think that's what inspires me. I really like sort of that look.
I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love Japanese art. So I'm definitely hear you on that one. Thank you so much for joining us. Borah, I'm not sure if you're officially here or not. If you are, feel free to introduce yourself. Hi.
Hi there. Hi, everyone.
Hi there. What would be your artwork from a foreign language or land that you would be inspired by?
So I was thinking about what inspires me, and yesterday I was talking about the feelings that movies transmit and books. And I remember when I was at the Belvedere Museum in Vienna, and I just saw this very small painting, and it was only it was just a drawing in black and white. And it really, I don't know, something in me like this was like boom, you know. And I get close to it, and it was by Egon Schiele. And that was like that's what inspired me to always be true to myself and share the most personal of me, even though it's not always the most commercial, because that's what really transmits the feelings to other people. Because Egon Schiele was a student of Klimt, but he didn't follow the Klimt style. So,
sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. We just had someone join. I don't know. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Julia. If you're there and around, we're just introducing ourselves just so that everybody can know who's in the room and sort of participates. If you're around and fancy sort of saying hello and who you are, that would be fab. But perhaps you're just joined and kind of missed the beginning. But it's absolutely fine. Don't worry. We'll just come back to you later on and we'll involve you in our workshop. We did just have a couple of other people that were on who've just dropped off. So I think they're rejoining. So we'll leave it there for now. But thank you so much all for sharing your introductions and creative icebreakers. And I will pass over to Madeline and David now.
Thank you, Kate. Just to say, I think because we've got such a lovely number of people here, if anyone's sort of burning to ask David questions as we go, please feel free to chip in. But as a starting point, I think something I'm really fascinated by with David's practice is how he's really challenging traditional forms of practice and sort of the role of architects and designers and writers in the city, and how we can start to rethink what it is that we're sort of doing and how we work. And so I thought the first thing I'd like to ask you, David, is whether you can sort of describe in a bit more detail, perhaps about the Irish Pavilion and how this sort of defines your way of working.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, just great to be part of this conversation. Really appreciate being asked to do this. So the Irish Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, I'm sure many of you know what the Venice Biennale is. It's a big international exhibition held in Venice, and a number of national participants. And I'm one of 6 of the co-curators of the Irish Pavilion. And our work deals with subverting the utopia that is the cloud, so the sleek marketing aesthetic that is the cloud, and getting behind that to some of the material processes and the very noisy and dirty and volatile environments in which these are made. I can show you very quickly a quick slide of our work, but I'll do that with a caveat, which is we designed our piece to be performative, which means showing you a slide of this piece in the room doesn't really do it justice, because it makes lots of noise and it performs all of these processes that go into sending a tweet or an email, or even facilitating this Zoom conversation. All of the energy consumption and cooling and heating, and the sheer ferocity of data centers where data is facilitated and moved around. So this is that piece. You might ask, why the Irish Pavilion? Well, actually, the story of data infrastructure is a very Irish story. It's 150 years old. The world's first transatlantic cable landed on the island of Ireland 150 years ago, an event that's since been called as significant as the moon landing. The mayor of New York at the time said a small town in Cork has become a suburb of New York. And that's why we're telling this story as part of the Irish Pavilion. As part of our pavilion, you can see there that little disc in the top right-hand corner embedded in slate. That's a slice of the original transatlantic cable that forms part of our pavilion. So that's what we've built. Very difficult to communicate it, but it's very noisy and volatile and kind of angry, and it does lots of things in the space. How does that define my practice? Well, we're a multidisciplinary team of artists, researchers, architects, designers, and we are intentionally a multidisciplinary team because we believe the scale of the problem that we face that is being created and produced by the exponential production and consumption of data infrastructure, which is a climate issue, which is a climate emergency issue, which is also an issue of how bodies are treated in space and how bodies are moved in space, how people are seen in space, how space is produced. It's an issue of public space, which is a crossover between our work and Madeline's work. That problem requires a multidisciplinary approach. It should not be left to architects alone. Yeah, my practice has always had a multidisciplinary edge to it. I don't believe in disciplinary boundaries. I think they're there to be broken and transversed. And I genuinely believe if we are going to face forward as thinkers and designers and practitioners into the problems that we need to address, then we have to do that as multidisciplinary practitioners.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think often we're too kind of bound by people wanting to put different professions in a box. And it's definitely something I found as soon as you say you're an architect, people just kind of assume certain things about you and what it is that you do. Yeah. And I think it's quite a big kind of conversation that needs to be had. Like, how do we actually sort of, I suppose, start to transcend those boundaries, and why is there this need to sort of define ourselves, I suppose.
Yeah. I think you've got to go right back to the structure of education in architecture schools, and that I know where you're based at the London School of Architecture, they're beginning to rethink how that works, but we need to go right back there. There's some really interesting stuff happening at Newcastle University. It's School X. A good friend of mine is the joint head of school there, and they are a maybe more of a kind of an American style multidisciplinary course, but I think at a postgraduate level where they're bringing in people from design backgrounds, arts, politics, legal, across the board to study together. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, because I actually studied like an engineering architecture course, but it's the only one in the country, because all too often architecture is just taught as this like one siloed course. And what I loved when we were talking earlier this week as a group was how everyone was coming at architecture and the city and placemaking from all these different backgrounds, talking about the economics behind it, the safety aspects. Like there's just all these different things that will feed into what we're doing, and we'll only create better kind of spaces by sort of working together like that. And I think that's something super exciting about your project. Like you really feel that this is not it's not like a traditional architectural installation. And my understanding is that the machine is constantly learning in the space as well. It'd be great to hear as well about what it's actually learned and how that's transformed and sort of the afterlife, I suppose.
Yeah, let me just reshare my screen just so I find it much easier to speak to images. This whole thing is constantly it operates on a 20-minute performance loop, and each performance is different. The bodies in the space are entangled into the screens through live thermal camera feeds. We use thermography as this kind of machine eye to be able to reveal things about the urban landscape that you wouldn't ordinarily see, particularly data centers. They're very hot and cold and volatile, huge urban bodies in space. So, but also we built an artificial intelligence machine learning algorithm because we wanted the structure not only to perform kind of visual imagery, but we wanted it to learn to speak about itself over the course of the biennale. So you'll see some text on these screens. I haven't actually got any close-ups to hand, but we fed it with about 10 million words on the topic of data infrastructure, from political documents to policy to philosophy to novels. There's Ballard's in there, and Foucault's in there, and the Irish government infrastructure bills in there. And the machine is learning to speak about itself. Sometimes it speaks absolute nonsense, and sometimes it actually speaks a lot of sense. One of the things it said, when you can actually ask it, not questions, but you can ask it statements and it will respond to them. We asked it about the cloud, and it said that the cloud is a thirsty and dirty object, which is a beautiful way of encapsulating the work that we've made. So yeah, I mean, that was not a significant part of the piece of work. Actually, it was kind of a thing that some of the team weren't sure about, some of us were, and it ended up in the thing, and it actually has become quite significant. I think it speaks to a lot of the processes that exist behind data infrastructure that are currently being deployed in the public sphere, or the so-called public sphere, which is obviously always contested space, which is something that we're really turning our attention to now as researchers and designers.
It sounds like it's writing beautiful poetry.
Interestingly, on Thursday, tomorrow, when I teach at Birmingham, it has written poetry, and I'm going to get my students to perform that poetry at a location on campus. So there'll be about 30 or 40 students holding placards with the poetry written on, and they'll all be performing it together. And we'll see what happens in so-called public space, whether we get stopped or asked to carry on. So yeah, I'll post that on Twitter or Instagram, and you can all see it.
Amazing. I've put the Instagram link in the chat for everyone. And also I see that, I think, Sean, have you got a question you'd like to ask? Or
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. David, I mean, excuse my ignorance, but how do you ask it questions and how does it answer?
Oh, you got the wrong person in the. This is the multidisciplinary nature of our team, you see. But so we don't actually ask it questions per se with a question mark at the end. You have to articulate it as a kind of as a statement, and it understands, or it's able to understand the words within that statement, and it has learned to respond to a particular statement. So it's input and output. But the Alan Butler, who's a well-known artist as part of our team. He was probably the most instrumental in building that in terms of the actual back end. So he would be better placed to answer that. But
do you sort of yell at it like an Alexa, or do you
no,
type it in
it's
somewhere?
all manually inputted.
Yeah.
I'd love to yell at it. I've got a lot of beefs with that thing we've built. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely fascinating. And like, what's the kind of future you see with it? Are you planning to sort of bring it back to Ireland, or use it to actually inform how you're designing some urban spaces?
Yeah, we are. We're hopefully, to be confirmed, can't say anything about it, but we hope that there's a big event show in Berlin that we're hoping to participate in February. And then we come back to Ireland to do the Galway International Arts Festival, which is super cool. Really excited about that. And then that will be it after 2022. Already a few other projects that a few of us are sort of beginning to think about, particularly with regards to the AI. We're quite interested in how we can use the AI to facilitate live performances that might critique or comment on the deployment of artificial intelligence in the public realm or the urban realm. So that's something we're working on at the moment. But we've also got a book as well, which it's called Entanglements, Data in the Irish Landscape. So if you're interested in any of the themes, you can get that book. Currently as a Kindle from Amazon, ironically from Amazon. And you can also get it direct from the publisher, which is Actar. So if that's of interest, you can connect with that too.
Great. And I suppose, like, just really interested in Amicas as a group, like how you sort of met one another, how you came together, sort of whether you're doing other projects together or how that will continue, because I know you all sort of have other things you do as well as Amicas together. It's not like you formed a firm that's completely 100% everyone's in. So just really interested to learn a bit more about how that sort of shaped, I suppose, your working methodology and how that's sort of come about.
Yeah, we came together for the Biennale. A few of us knew each other beforehand, and then there's not many people in the world of architecture who are interested in or interested in dealing with a lot of the issues that we were interested in. There's more now, actually, after the 3-year period since we formed. So it was kind of hard to find people, but we did, and we found really good people. And yeah, I'm working as a multidisciplinary team on a project of this scale with some people you've never met before, and some people who are actually located elsewhere, so you don't physically meet them for a number of months. Is a challenge. I think as much as we've built something and put it in a space, we've also gone through an incredible learning process of how we could have built the thing better, not the thing that's physically in the space, but as a process that we've gone through as a team. It was as much a process of learning how to do it as it was doing it, which was a good challenge.
Because I guess it's been such like a long project, because I think we first met in 2019 perhaps, and we all obviously thought the Biennale was going to happen last year. Sorry. I suppose it's also a very different world that we all started off designing these projects in and working together in, and these are very intense projects because they're low budgets. You're working on a project that's going to be installed in a different country, like you're saying, with these really complex structures of a team that's relying off a lot of goodwill of people and stuff. I was just curious whether, if you were starting it now, sort of in this world where we've become much more used to working digitally and sort of together, how you think that might have shaped the experience in a different way.
Well, do you know what? It's really interesting. I mean, firstly, I'll say that the thing that the images that you see of the thing in the room there with this thermal imagery, and that all kind of maybe looks a bit more familiar in a sort of post-COVID landscape, but that whole thing was designed and put in a box prior to COVID, which was kind of weird. I mean, there's nothing prescient about it at all, but it sort of appears now to have some kind of prescience about it. actually, because of the locations of our team and where everyone was internationally at different times, even pre-COVID, we did everything via Zoom. Everything, all of our meetings. And even at the point where lockdown was imposed in Dublin, in Ireland, where the thing was being built, we then had to make a virtual copy of the pavilion in Unreal Engine, which is a game engine that people like Epic Games use to produce very famous kind of computer games, because we needed to. To be honest, it probably wouldn't have made any difference. We had to do everything online and mediate it virtually anyway. So that was kind of interesting in itself. But what would we do differently as a team if we were to approach it again? I think working with a multidisciplinary team, especially people who don't know each other, I think it's absolutely clear that right now we probably could have spent more time right at the beginning just setting expectations very, very clearly about our personal expectations about what it is we want to do, expectations about how we are going to function as a team, the absolute basics about how decisions are going to be made, what's the shape of a meeting, how does that work? If decisions can't be made, then how do we make a decision? Because there are going to be points where we are just going to have to make a call on something. There were 5 or 6 moments of those that happened throughout the process. What roles exist? Are we willing to be honest with each other without being without kind of challenging or sacrificing relationships, friendships? And I think friendship is absolutely key to any kind of team dynamic in a multidisciplinary context. And like, what's the point if you can't have fun as well? To quote David Graeber, the late David Graeber. I mean, you know, the last 3 years for everyone, regardless of whether you're trying to do something in Venice in a room or whether you're, you know, trying to just teach a class of children from your dining room, it's been really difficult. And I think that when I read that David Graeber essay, I just thought, you know, what is the point if we can't have fun, you know? And just have a laugh and be friends and continue to communicate and talk with each other. And that was one of the comments from our opening in Venice last week. I've lost track of time, to be honest, with what happened then, because it was a big party, kind of 72 hours. But a lot of people said, like, it feels like you're friends. It feels like you're, you know, you have a laugh, and we do. And I think that's really important. I've forgotten your question, but that's where I'm going to finish.
I think that was really a great answer. I mean, I completely agree. I think you can tell when people have had fun with a project and when they're enjoying themselves. And I think often, you know, we're all looking at these very kind of serious topics. And I think that you often have to take that step back and sort of have some fun with it as well. And it's kind of through that fun as well that you sort of create accidental moments which then lead you somewhere else. And I think the other really interesting thing you touched upon was the kind of just defining the structure of a team and what the roles and responsibilities are, because I think I've noticed on nearly every collaboration I've ever worked on, we've like never really had a proper org chart, for example, which is like, you know, I think architects shy away from this stuff because we're like, oh, it's, you know, we don't need that, we will understand, we'll just like work together. But actually that kind of thing is really important. Because as you say, as you're working on a project, you actually do need to have all these roles defined, otherwise things slip through the net. I was wondering if you could also just talk us a bit maybe about some of your other projects and just sort of how you got to where you are today, like, you know, how you sort of discovered this process of what it is that you enjoy, and given you sort of had, I suppose, quite a traditional education, but then sort of, yeah, have found this path.
Interestingly, I don't think I did have a traditional education, but I'll tell you about that. Like, I spent about 15 or 20 years working in traditional practice. I've been doing some kind of interesting stuff, but because of the education that I had, I always felt out of place and uncomfortable in those places. I always felt constrained, and I knew, and that's a long time to know that you're really not in the space that you're supposed to be, but I don't feel I developed the confidence to be able to, and the self-awareness to be able to say, actually, no, the way that I'm thinking and feeling right now is okay. So to legitimize that and then to act on it. So my education wasn't traditional. I was at the University of Greenwich in the early 90s. So the early 90s in London was very, very cool. Kind of like, it was a lot of energy going on, something happening in the art scene, something happening in the architecture scene, in the music scene. There was something brewing. And Sean Griffiths from FAT and Kester Rattenbury were pitching their studio for the University of Greenwich. I think it was second year. And they just said, like, if you're sick of, I'm not quoting them verbatim, but like, if you're sick of kind of like the architecture scene, typical Sean, kind of like Oasis style rock and roll sort of thing. Like, you know, if you want to sort of say F you to all that, if you want to try something different, if you want, you know, come and join our studio. We're not looking for people if you want to conform. If you don't want to conform, sign up. And I was like, that's me. I want to sign up. Okay. So I remember day one, they walk in. So Kester's a journalist, you know, background in architecture, a journalist and a writer, which I wonder whether maybe that's where my inspirations come from, to be involved in writing as well. But Sean walks in and holds up Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish. First day of year 2 of architecture, and it said, everyone's going to read this. And I was like, yes. Like, I don't even know who that guy is, but it sounds cool. And I went away and read it. Did I understand it? No, I've read it numerous times since then, and it's become a massive part of my kind of research and how I think. But that just blew my mind. And then he said, right, everyone's going to go away and design a prison. That was our first year 2 project. Everyone else was doing museums and archives and galleries and schools. And it was like, no, you're going to design a prison based on Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish. And that would, for me, was like this journey of going, wow, architecture, and obviously FAT went away and did what they did. So they were kind of like a inspiration for us, just to think actually architecture practice can be really different. And then I spent 15 years trying to work out why I wasn't feeling comfortable about designing whatever it might be, you know, residential blocks at the end of the Old Kent Road in London. So yeah, and then I think moving here during the last credit crunch crash financial nightmare, when there wasn't much work around, created this seedbed of necessity out of which I had to then think about what it was I wanted to do. And it was actually, oh God, this is sound weird, right? But it was actually a visit to Copenhagen where we had been taken to a very famous restaurant in Copenhagen called Noma. And at the end of the meal, they offer you a tour around their kitchens and their research labs and all this sort of stuff. So it was on that tour, having had the experience of the meal, which was not just eating a meal, it was this whole kind of embodied experience. And then going around their practice, as I would call it, just blew my mind to say, actually, do you know, focused, sustained practice in a particular discipline on a particular idea can manifest in a way that is truly kind of like defining and shaping. And it was for me, and that was a moment for me where I was like, no, I am now going to move into what I know I should have been doing for the last 15 years. So it took me to go to the world's most famous restaurant, which I was very lucky to have been there. But that, just to experience that kind of practice, was a moment of real inspiration for me. So thank you, Renier Redzepi and his team.
Amazing, yeah. I think it's very interesting as well to think about those projects that people often don't consider. I remember in my second year, which I always look back to as sort of a really defining project for me, was we had to design a crematorium. And like you're saying, like everyone else was designing like spas and stuff. And then my group had been given crematorium, and it was just an incredible way to kind of grapple with this taboo of death and just start to really think about how architecture and urban design really goes that step further. And I remember at the same time, my grandmother was in a hospice, and I started to look at the design of that hospice and how amazing these places were for end of life kind of care. And I think those experiences can be really sort of transformative in kind of making you rethink the relationship between design and our cities.
That's a really good point right there. So like it was never about designing a prison. Like that was secondary, and I'm sure it wasn't necessarily about designing the crematorium. It was about understanding how spaces are coded in a particular way and learning how to think differently about spaces and the multiplicity of forces and networks and codes that exist in any given space. And when you learn that, that can be taken on to anything else. So, you know, in teaching students, and I know from what I know about you, I think we'd be very similar on this. I'm more interested in getting them to think differently about the world. If we can get them to think differently about the world, then I think we're winning.
Yeah. It's not necessarily about the most kind of beautiful detail, but it's about this kind of thought process, and that's how we can apply it to lots of different kind of things. So I'm going to ask you what's probably going to be a horrible question, but just as a final one, just really curious, like right now, what would be your kind of dream next project? Like, would it be a prison or or just something completely different? Maybe you want to go and inform some policy at the UN or something, or
I think I'd want to do all of those and more, but I think that's part of my problem is I'm like a magpie. I just I'd like to do well. We're developing some ideas, I'll say, about how we might deploy a new version of this artificial intelligence. I've designed lots of buildings and I'm grateful for having done that. I don't feel any kind of impulse to design anymore. I'm much more comfortable in this space that we're in now. So hopefully there's a few possibilities. There'll be a few possibilities going forward in that space as well. So whether you call that architecture or art or design, I don't know, but it's that. and some more writing as well. I've got to finish my PhD as well by June, so that's probably the next big project, if I'm being honest. So that's quite scary.
Oh, amazing. Well, good luck with the PhD. I'm sure you'll do fine. No, absolutely fascinating. And thank you so much for sharing all of that about both the Irish Pavilion and your career. And yeah, it's really, really super interesting. I think something that's really stuck out to me is how even though you're not necessarily doing lots of building traditional practice now, it sounds like that background in it has sort of led you to where you are. Yeah. And somehow there is no right or wrong decision in your career. It's just kind of where things take you. And as long as you're constantly learning from those experiences, somehow you're growing. And I think it's incredible to see how that's sort of all informed this amazing pavilion and where you are today. So thank you very much.
No, thank you very much.
I think, am I handing over to Kate now to talk about our challenge?
That was fascinating, thank you, and so relevant, because what we wanted to do together, and actually we're going to just do this as a group exercise. So sometimes we all go off into breakout rooms, but I think with a smaller group we can do it more interestingly all together discussing this. But what we really wanted to try and get a handle on is how individuals can identify their skills and what they can offer to a project team, and also then looking kind of objectively at a project team and thinking, what is missing, what could be enhanced, how can we improve this? So actually everything that we've just been hearing about multidisciplinary teams and using different sort of expertise in different ways is really, really fascinating and relevant to this. And a little bit of background that I wanted to share, as I said, sort of drawing on what we've heard from David and Madeline, but also from Amica Dall, who was meant to join us today, who sort of did a bit of a preparation with me. She was telling me about the work that she does at Assemble. And you'll be able to learn a little bit more about this from the video that will come from Amica. But some of the things that really stood out for me from what she was saying was about respecting expertise and sort of redefining what expertise are. I think there's a lot that she was feeling, which I think resonates with what you've both said of, if you've got a job title of architect or designer, it sort of gives a sense that is you, it defines you, and then you have a purpose within the team. And particularly, we learned this a lot from Daniele, our guest speaker from yesterday, of not necessarily diving into a community or a problem and fixing it for that community, you know, and that was sort of historically perhaps what was happening is, you know, you're an architect, go and redesign a city, and actually that isn't, you know, a useful approach. It's very much more about sort of how you can collaborate with the community. And Madeline, I'm sure you've got a lot to say about this from your work. So really, I think, you know, for me, what this challenge is about is us understanding and questioning what is expert. How could we collectively, as the individual people that we are right now and our skills, solve a problem, even if it's nothing to, you know, your work has nothing to do with cities or communities. How could you contribute? Another thing that Amica's work was really good to highlight, which is very relevant to design thinking and clearly part of the work we've heard about already, is this idea of the kind of cyclical process and the iterative design. So with Assemble, they make an awful lot of temporary structures for communities. So she has examples of a temporary cinema, a temporary theatre. You know, it's a physical structure, and it often, in my opinion, looks quite beautiful, but it's temporary and it's designed for the community. And the way that is created is following the way that she defined it was make, check, and it's going around in a circle, and how this is very different to perhaps what certain sectors do of planning, consulting widely, fixing a plan, and then being very rigid to that plan. And that's you know, a very kind of unfreeing way of working, but also it means that you can't ever reshape your plan from what you've learned from the community. So again, this is all sort of very relevant for what we've been hearing about today. I think the final point that Amica made, which I thought was useful for us to reflect upon, which is about scale. And really, instead of thinking, particularly with a big challenge, which, you know, and a very interesting piece of work that Amica was working on that she mentioned is actually looking at sort of helping young children in urban city centres who are having sort of breathing problems, and it's, you know, it's a biological issue caused by urbanism, but it's affecting individuals. This is a huge problem affected by an even bigger problem, which is environmental change. And how can you know, pin that down into something that will help individuals? And really her way of defining part of that was about, instead of thinking about it about how can I provide a solution, it's how can I make it possible for the community to find a solution, and really sort of empowering the community and it being part of that cyclical process. So of course, Amica would be the expert talking about her work, and you'll hear about it in the video. But what I wanted to do, inspired by everything we've talked about today, is have a think about us as a group solving a challenge. So I'm just going to share my screen, because then we can work together through this. And as I said, I really encourage you all to kind of be part of this and talk and ask questions as you go. So here we are, right. Just talk you through it. So it's about understanding your skills is the kind of very broadest way of looking at it, but really it's about skills in the context of trying to solve a challenge. So what I want us to think about is us being an urgent urban response team. So we're really trying to focus on that idea of this being related to cities and communities. And I think urban is quite a useful environment to place this in. We need to think of a challenge that we're looking to solve that affects a city. So that's super broad. So if you remember back to the kind of design thinking process, our first step is to try and define a challenge together. So we'll come back to that first. I then want everyone to have a think about 1 or 2 skills that you have as an individual that you think you can contribute to a team in order to solve that challenge. And this is where you've got to be quite selective, because, you know, I'm sure you're very multi-skilled people, but we'll try and get them down to just 1 or 2 skills. We're then going to think about how we might prioritize those skills. So as a team, like, is there any sort of hierarchy here that we need to address? Is there, you know, are we going to go with a very kind of democratic process, but, you know, what would be most useful to solve that problem? We'll take a moment also to reflect on what's missing. And I think this is always a useful question in any planning process, is to have a moment to think, what is missing here and how could we get that skill back in our group? And what we're then going to do is just try and wind that all up into a kind of set of small actions that we think we would be able to do if we were given 1 week as a team from today to solve this challenge. What would we do? So this is purely an exercise to try and get us thinking about ourselves and teamwork, and really kind of working together to have a think about how we might approach that. And I'll be calling on Madeline and David with their experience as well at the end to kind of wrap it up into thinking about something a bit broader that you might be able to do in your own working lives. So I'm going to start with the first one. What I'm going to do is just actually keep it on this screen so that I can type some notes so we can kind of see what we're talking about. So I'm just checking my chat. Fab. Okay, so let's think about a challenge. So feel free to throw a few options forward. What do you think, if thinking about your own city or somewhere you grew up, somewhere urban, what do you think is a challenge that if you were put on the spot, you would want to solve in that city? So feel free just to unmute yourselves and call some things out. And bear in mind some of the principles if you imagine your brain is going to lots and lots of different things now. So feel free to kind of go with your gut and think about, just throw out a couple of things that are already springing into your mind and we can shape it together into a challenge.
Well, following on from the discussion on Monday, I really loved Matthew's kind of points about the beaches and sort of the challenge of having these kind of very, very private spaces or these barriers in the city.
Yep.
Sort of exclusivity, I suppose, the challenge of having these exclusive spaces and why they're necessary.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. So where there's a space that's kind of been taken off for one community and you can't get in, there's a paywall, how can we break those down? Anyone else?
Or maybe we should actually reshape it so it's about how do we create more inclusive spaces or something.
Nice, looking on its head, yeah. Great. Anyone got anything that they want to say off the back of that they like? Anyone got a picture of a place in their head, a bit like the beaches that we were talking about, somewhere that you feel you would want to make more inclusive?
My mind goes again to the public transport and how it can be safer, which is the same topic that we talked about on Monday.
Yeah. Yeah, so for those that weren't there and for those watching, this is a really, really interesting discussion from Monday's session where we were thinking about particularly female safety, people that identify as female, that if you're walking home at night, it's dark, and how often that can actually affect people's willingness to go out at different times of day and feeling unsafe on public transport. There's a lot of very interesting stuff around that. We could definitely look at public transport. Maybe let's come up with a third option and then we can pin it down together. Anyone else got something else that they can think of that they would solve as a challenge in a city?
I guess it's not really a third option, unfortunately, but sort of related to the first point. Maybe sometimes there's spaces sort of which are sort of accessible to everyone, but then people still don't feel comfortable going to them. So how do you make sure that sort of everyone really feels, this is a place they can go to? So yeah.
I'm actually, if we can pick up on that, because I think it was your example about the beaches, if we're right. Has there been any progress in making some of the paid beaches accessible, or is that definitely still a kind of problem that exists?
I think nothing about sort of paid beaches being more accessible, but I've just seen sort of the public beaches that were already there, them sort of trying to sort of clean it up a little bit and stuff like that.
Yep.
But then I think I've also seen some areas in Dar es Salaam which are like they've sort of paved them really nicely and stuff like that and planted a few let's say plants, but then they're meant to be used as public spaces, but then people still don't use them. They prefer to go to other places. So for some reason, there's something holding them back.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Whether it's kind of historic barrier or something psychological there. Or practical that we'd need to unlock.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe we actually have a go at doing both of these so we can run them through together, because I think it'd be interesting to see how our skills might be different for these different two challenges. So what we'll do is we'll look at specifically, let's go with the beach option. So this is an exclusive beach that we are trying to open up and make inclusive. And again, let's think about those set parameters. So we've got 1 week to do this in. Let's give ourselves a really, really low budget, so we're not sort of going too extreme and sort of transforming the entire world. We have to be realistic a little bit, to realistically optimistic. So imagine we've got very, very low budget. We've got 1 week, and we're going to try and open up those beaches and make them inclusive and get the community actually there. We'll go through the whole set of questions, and then let's come back to how can we make individuals feel safer on public transport that don't at the moment. So, right, let's do this as a team then. So individually, I'd like just 1 or 2 skills that you think you have for thinking about that beach challenge. So we've got the next week. We want to try and open up that beach. We want to make it inclusive. What immediately comes to your mind as a skill you could contribute that could help us solve this challenge? So perhaps if we just go round one at a time, and I'll do it as well. Madeline, can I start with you? What do you think you would bring to the project team?
I suppose I think I could bring some kind of engagement aspect to talking to the different, well, trying to get sort of maybe workshops or some way to kind of get the different people who this is affecting together to understand what the issues are.
Nice. Okay, yeah, that's brilliant. Jenny, what do you think you would bring? What skill?
I would say kind of the same thing, because I'm very research oriented. So I would suggest like going up to people and kind of interviewing them.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned research, actually, because research could be another skill that we could draw upon there. Okay. Matthew, what comes to mind for you?
I guess I would say something more graphic. So, you know, let's say like, yeah, sort of just signs maybe around the city, something like that, yeah, something like that. So sort of immediate visual marker. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. That's really helpful. Borah, have you got something you want to bring to our project team?
I don't know, I was thinking maybe like after all the guys will be done, I would tag what is missing.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you there. The audio wasn't great. What did you say?
Yeah, the internet is very bad. I would say like, after everything is said and done, I would check what is missing. For example, for the workshop delivery, I would check the details. If we're doing a specific workshop, we need this and this, and yeah, basically thematic analysis.
So sort of coordination, kind of logistics. Yeah. Okay. Fab. Always helpful. Okay. And I think I put myself on the spot now. What would I bring to this? So we're trying to unlock the beaches. So I think perhaps maybe more on the kind of marketing and PR. So I do quite a lot of that kind of work. Maybe I'd try and leverage some local media coverage, maybe try and think about how we could, the platforms we could reach to get to people. So maybe I'd have a think about kind of communication vehicles, maybe is maybe what I'm going to bring to the table. Right. So if we're thinking about this, so the way that this is sounding to me is it's sounding like what we're thinking is that we need to do, we kind of want to understand a little bit more from people about why they want to get on these beaches and maybe why they're not going to the beaches once they've opened up. It feels to me like the bit of the challenge that we're at is that the beaches are open, but people aren't coming. So Matthew, pulling on your point, so that they're there, you know, you don't have to pay anymore. Why aren't you going? And it sounds like that's the bit of this challenge that we're at. So what we've got here is a set of skills. So we've got researching, you know, trying to find out exactly what it is we're going to ask these people, maybe getting some local knowledge together, any articles on, you know, historically, has there been something, you know, are there animals around that people are frightened of? Is there a current in the sea that people don't want to go to? Is, You know, is there any other information, which is where the research might come in? We're looking at how we could use workshops and interviews to actually hear from people and talk to them, and that research might have fed into that. We've got some excellent coordination, which is essential, because otherwise, you know, how are we holding these workshops, how are we getting the information out there? We have graphics as a skill, so we need to think about, you know, how can we use that in terms of flyers, signage, like you said, Matthew. It's, you know, actually is that the kind of next stage of the process where we're physically showing that there is a beach here and you can come to it. And I'll be there, you know, trying to get perhaps some more ambassadorial roles and media roles, the places that people trust, in order to get the message out to them. So that's a fab set of skills that we've pulled together in no time at all, which is great. We should feel good about that. I want to hear from you. What do you think from that group of skills is going to be the most important? Like, if you had to pick one of these things, what do you think is going to be the most important?
For me, I think I would definitely pick the sort of interview / workshop delivery. I think I would group them together as the most important. I just, there's an example of, there's sort of one of the largest informal settlements in the world, which is Kibera in Kenya. And they're sort of right next to a Think UN research station or something like that. And what's that led to is that there's a lot of sort of over research, if that's a word, into their communities, which means that a lot of people living there don't actually have a good relationship with, like, you know, the people who come to research them, since they just come and then they go. So I think I would say that community consultation is really important, and like maybe not even from us, through a local intermediary. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, where was that example from?
In Kenya.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're used as a kind of subject matter, which makes them feel very alienated from it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Any other perspectives on how we might prioritize these skills? Jenny, Borah, Madeline, any thoughts on how we might put these in order? So if we put community consultation as the top, what do you think might be the next important skill?
And I think they're all really important, and maybe it's about a relationship between them or something. Rather than saying one's more important than the other, maybe it's sort of the order that you do things in, or the order you bring these skills in.
Great, yeah, absolutely. So that's more looking at it as a kind of, you know, a web of different skills that we're going to pull together. So if we were going in a more linear way, then what, after a consultation, what do you think might be? So my gut instinct is perhaps after we've had a consultation, that's when maybe we're putting it into action, some of the things we've learned, and maybe that's where the kind of graphic and the signage comes in, is we've actually learned what it is the barrier, and then we're using some visuals to try and show people why that barrier has gone, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think maybe that goes hand in hand with comms.
Obviously threaded throughout this, which is where that kind of web approach might work really well, is the coordination and the research. Is we need to keep keeping things to time, making sure that people understand what's being asked of them, and these things perhaps are just threaded throughout the whole thing. What do you think's missing though? So if we're thinking about this, you know, again, trying to use the empathy. So we are that community. We know why we don't want to go to that beach, or perhaps we didn't even know it was available to us. What's the skill that's missing, thinking about their perspective on it, that we think we need in our project team?
Maybe like a prototype for the tasks, because we'll have the insights from the people, and to see like what they want to change in their community, like with the beaches, and how they want to see this change, and maybe come up with a prototype.
Very good. Yeah, that's interesting. And is there a sort of prototype in your head that you're already sort of imagining? Is there a way that your thinking is going?
In terms of the beaches, I'm not quite sure.
Matthew, what do you
Because it's a bit of a complicated area, because it's the first thing that comes to mind as a policy student is the land ownership and how the people who have businesses there will react to this change that we want to make. So the first things that come to mind are these ones, and I think it's going to be a bit of a barrier, but it always depends.
But I think that's really key, is that we actually don't have anyone in this particular group that knows the local infrastructure, the decision makers, the policy. There might be something very specific that we just don't know about. So perhaps that is a skill we need. And whether that's either somebody that just practices in that area or some sort of ambassador that might be able to be called on to help us. So that's two things that we're missing at the moment. Is there anything else that you think we're missing to be able to tackle this challenge?
Potentially sort of funding, or like someone who's understanding the costs of what we're doing, like a
kind of funding advisor, perhaps?
Yeah, or like maybe like just a quantity surveyor or something to understand,
yeah,
you know, whether there are any implications. I don't know what it is we'd be doing, but if we're like proposing to move like a whole load of sand or something.
Yeah. So someone that's kind of thinking about it from a more practical sense. Okay, well, let's work with those three. So that's really interesting. So we've got...
Might need an engineer then as well.
yeah, get them in as well. Exactly. Interesting. For me, one of the things that I think might also be nice to add is, which I actually think we probably have between us, but perhaps we haven't identified, is a kind of creative person, which I think is what we're sort of implying with the workshops. But perhaps something, a format, someone that knows how to inspire local people with the workshops, that maybe isn't just, you know, sitting down and talking about some questions. Maybe it's a performance, or, you know, maybe we use our graphic design to kind of make some sort of cool graphic that people can interact with. So what I might suggest is that between us, we figure out a kind of creative route that we might deliver some of this through. So I might just add creativity here. So if we're thinking about ourselves as a team, then, does anyone feel that they have those skills that we think are missing, that we just haven't said? Because that might be the first step, is actually, do we have these skills amongst us right here? Anyone secretly a quantity surveyor?
I think we've got the creativity skills here.
I think we probably do.
Yeah.
And what about the prototyping? Do you think, Matthew, with your graphic design skills, you would be able to take those and use them for sort of prototyping something?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that could work.
Cool. So we're covered with prototyping. So how would we maybe fill this gap about the kind of more practical person, the kind of quantity surveyor, engineer, and also the local decision makers? What ideas do you have for how we could fill that gap in our team, bearing in mind we've only got a week and low budget? What do you think?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, how might you creatively solve the fact that we've got a gap when it comes to knowledge of the local policy and areas, and also sort of a practical set of skills like engineering or quantity surveying? What steps might we take to fill that gap in our team? I think
we can, like, because it's a week, sorry, we can reach out to local government and just, or of course, go online first. That's the first easiest option, but also reach out to local government to know about land ownership. I remember Maddie mentioned that there is this land ownership, Who Owns London, like the website, so it might be something similar.
Yeah. And
it might resolve the problem really quickly, like the gap.
Yeah. Matthew, what are you going to add?
I think I would just add, I guess it's sort of just related to the community consultation, but lots of, between the, let's say the engineering side, just a lot of like using graphics, just sort of a lot of images shared between them and the local community, just so that they sort of visually understand how the project will look like, because not everyone will understand it just by words.
Yeah, that's really great. And what about Maddie, maybe from your experience, what do you do when what you really need is maybe more people or experts, but you really have no budget, and you don't want to kind of use up people's time without sort of giving some sort of value for it. Have you got any experience in how you would kind of activate people with a very low fund like that?
Yeah, I think you can look at like existing networks and existing groups that you can maybe tap into, and sort of take the time to understand what's already kind of existing in the area. And, you know, there might be like a local university or something, or like existing community groups or something, where you can start to tap into those groups and build up the kind of skills. I also think you can, I mean, it's also kind of nuanced and dependent on a project, but there are also things like crowdfunding or looking at how you can give back in other ways.
Yeah, fabulous. So is it? Yeah, go on. Sorry, Borah.
We read this article on mental models, but one of my classes, and there was too many examples from US, India, etc. that you don't need money if you have different mental models on your group. For example, there was a case of building a homeless shelter in LA, and how they invested millions and millions, and still the homeless shelter wasn't successful. But when they brought all the stakeholders into one team, for example, they brought a businessman, they brought the citizens, they brought the homeless people, then they included also people from the government. And when all these stakeholders work together, because everybody has their own network and everybody has the will to make this work, that's when the homeless shelter finally was functioning, because everybody was coordinating with everybody in a goodwill.
That's a really fantastic example, and exactly that. It's about sort of getting everyone pointing in the right direction, and actually kind of being physically present and knowing what their role is, which I think is what we were talking about earlier as well, is everyone knowing what they're bringing to the table, but also feeling welcome to contribute to other areas, which is what I really liked about what David was saying in terms of how he works. That's a really fantastic example. So what I'm going to add here is create a kind of shared ambition, multiple stakeholders. Right spelling. Okay, brilliant. So we've gone through a process. We've defined our skills. We're actually getting to the point of that kind of prototyping, testing stage of design thinking, because what we've starting to see here is we have a certain set of skills as a group. There's certain skills that we perhaps didn't realize we had that we want to bring in. So really utilizing our creativity, our design, our research. But that actually perhaps one of the first steps we need to do is to find those wider stakeholders beyond just us, that really know the local area, really could have a vested interest in trying to get the community to those beaches, perhaps thinking quite openly, you know, who are the other stakeholders that might actually have something else to gain from this? You know, what if there's kind of local restaurants or bars that might want to be on that beach and that could generate them revenue? Or what if there's a local school that might use the beach for a kind of educational purpose? Is there other ways that we could use that beach that might bring people in, that helps it become more of a trusted space? So I think all of that kind of comes into that initial research piece that we thought about. And we clearly have the skills between us to then really consult with that community and make them feel part of the solution that we come up with. So I think there we've done one example where actually, surprise, surprise, even just between the 5 of us here, we could get people to those beaches. They could feel very welcome. And I think it sounds realistic within our time frame. And really thinking about kind of Amica's process, the whole point of what we'd be doing is continuing to make and check and make sure that we're kind of staying very cyclical and not necessarily sticking to a linear plan. So let's try this again. I think it's interesting to do it and to kind of get a completely blank slate, and we'll do that kind of right back to the beginning. Blank slate, think openly, We've had one practice, so we'll be familiar with what we're going to do. So I want to think about that safe public transport. What would be really fab is, Jenny, do you mind just kind of reminding us of that example and any specifics that came to mind when you came up with it originally? What were you imagining? What's the scenario that you were imagining that we were trying to solve? Oh, sorry, if you just unmute yourself. Oh, sorry, you're having a mute issue. Oh, I'm not quite sure what's happening with Jenny's computer. I'll have a go at remembering in the meantime. So what we were talking about was basically safety in London. So we were really imagining a classic situation of someone, we were thinking of someone female who is at night trying to get home on a bus, perhaps has had experience of feeling threatened on a bus before late at night. And we were before discussing this idea of perhaps there's like an alarm system that could be set off. And of course, you wouldn't have to be female to use this. You could, anyone that's feeling vulnerable in that situation can use an alarm that would make people aware that they are distressed. It would perhaps link up to the emergency services, and perhaps would be maybe an app type system that would mean that families could also feel trusted that their loved one is safe at night. So what we're really thinking about here is the challenge of how can we make people that don't feel safe on nighttime public transport, let's say it's in London for the sake of it, because we're doing this from LSE, who's based in London. So how can we make those people feel safer on that public transport? That's the challenge that we're trying to sell. And if we use that example of some sort of alarm system, so you can have a think, and it might not be an app, it might be a physical alarm, so you can have a think about what that would be. So let's go back to that question about the skills that you have. If we go one by one, what is the skill that you're going to offer to try and to create this solution, this alarm-based solution to protect these people? Madeline, what's coming up in your mind? What do you think you can bring to the group?
I think design, but also from like an urban perspective, like that. I think it's not necessarily just the alarm that's the solution. So thinking about things like street lighting and overlooking and how this alarm might be working as part of a wider system.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So there's the kind of designing what the actual, again, maybe a prototype sort of thing. And then there's the kind of wider infrastructure. So I like that because actually it's looking beyond the kind of individuals and we're just thinking about the city around them. So you mentioned lighting. What else might be something that comes to mind for sort of public safety from your experience?
Just sort of overlooking and, making sure windows are sort of facing onto the streets. Things like, I think like street art and taking pride in public space can help.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Matthew, what's coming to mind? What do you think you can offer to our challenge solving?
I think I would sort of say something similar to Madeline, the aspect of design, but then more sort of focusing on accessibility. So I guess looking at, let's say, women who are vision impaired or have mobility issues, how would they be sort of use the alarm system themselves?
Which is critical. What an amazing skill to have. That's going to be very important. Fantastic. Thank you. And Borah and Jenny, what would you both bring to the team?
Sorry, my laptop just
Fine.
shut down. So when I first thought about it, it was just a personal experience traveling back home from work late at night, and you just didn't feel safe with all the news about women getting attacked recently in London. So the idea of the alarm it seems like an easy solution, but also I come to think about the application of it will not be something that can be applied by us as an NGO or let's say organization. It should be run through the government. What I could is just reach out to the different branches that could make this possible, and also to talk to other women who can share their experiences and help us tailor the solution even better than just an alarm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Give
okay,
ideas
great.
on how they would like to be protected, for example,
Yeah.
or because I feel like different neighborhoods in London are different from each other. So not necessarily one solution would fit to all of the neighborhoods. So maybe tailor it
And is that so? Is that a set of skills that you think you both have right now to go and consult across London and find those people to get their opinions? Do you think that's something you can bring to the project team?
Yeah, I think after doing a master's degree at LSE, you understand that research is the most important part of the process. And also that it's basically the mode of LSE, understanding the root cause of the problem, where you begin to give a solution.
Brilliant. Okay, so this is really helpful, and I'll come back to your point about the sort of government-wide, because I think it'd be interesting to have a quick conversation about sort of scale. So we're sort of coming up with this design thing. We're actually in a really good place because we've got two people here that are going to help design the actual thing, and particularly thinking about it from an accessibility perspective. We can think about the alarm within that wider infrastructure and how to address that. And then back to that idea of consultation, which keeps coming back, which is so important because of the empathy piece of actually going out, talking to people and recognizing that this problem might be different in different areas. So there has to be something about scalability in that. And I think that point about research and analysis is really key. What I am going to bring to this is, I think it would be interesting to think about how to encourage people to use it, perhaps. So again, maybe trying to identify, based on your research and analysis, people that each of the community might recognize, and that is maybe it's kind of like celebrity person or a well-known person that we can get to use this, that starts to get people recognizing that's where I should go. So maybe I'll do a kind of ambassador outreach sort of role. So again, maybe a slightly different question rather than prioritizing and thinking about Maddie's point about kind of process is what kind, as a team structure, so say we've got all those skills and we are together trying to solve this problem, what kind of structure do you think we should put in place between us to actually get this job done? What might be a good approach? Madeline, what would you do if you were suddenly doing this in real life? How would you get us to work together and make use of our skills?
I think going back to David's lessons learned, start off by doing an org chart. But also I think the importance of like also just getting to know each other personally is also really important, and just setting out expectations that we're all kind of aligned to, just making those very clear from the beginning. Maybe having like a kick-off workshop where we get to know one another.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I really loved. I thought his points about also making it fun. You know, this is a very serious issue. It could be very, very important and actually seriously save people and help people. But we have to enjoy the process. So we need some sort of kickoff where we really kind of get to know our skills, get to know each other, and try and make this as fun as possible. For the rest of you, Matthew, Borah, Jenny, is there anything else that you think we might want to think about in terms of how we structure our skills? So in terms of kind of prioritizing them, how are we actually structuring them and bringing them together? What thoughts do you have on that? Maybe as a previous project you've worked on springing to mind where you think you'd want to recreate that? Have you worked in a multidisciplinary team before and had all these skills and you've really enjoyed it? Have you got an example that comes to mind?
Yeah, I guess I would say sort of similar to the previous one, sort of community consultation can be prioritized. Just sort of like, I think what Jenny said about, different neighborhoods of London will have different needs or ideas of how to implement the alarm system. So yeah, I think I would put that at the forefront.
And perhaps that's something that we might actually all enjoy. So maybe that's something across the whole team is getting the opportunity to go out, maybe taking the lead of Jenny and Borah, who are going to lead on it, and they bring us in, and we all kind of set the task of going out and meeting the community and talking to them, which will be very rewarding. So what's missing here? Because I think what's interesting is the point that Jenny, you made about it's needing to be on a kind of government level. What do you think is missing in order for us to either get it to that level, or perhaps we flip it on our head? How could we achieve this just as the five of us? Like, what's your instinct on that?
So maybe test an idea first. So as Matthew mentioned earlier with the pitch, like not Matthew mentioned it, to visualize like the solution, maybe just I don't know how that would be put in practice, but just visualize it or test it and then show to the people who actually will give the permission to do this, that it actually works and people like it, the community likes it.
Yep. Okay. So that might be something that we're missing, that we need to find is sort of who and how are we going to get our visualization in front of in order to get their buy-in, particularly if we're doing it across a whole city. So perhaps again, that's kind of getting in those kind of policy area people that we talked about earlier. Is there anything else missing? What else might be missing that we think we could bring into our team?
We are very self-sufficient until now.
Yeah, we're very self-sufficient. I mean, one thing that's occurring to me is the actual location of where we're applying this. We're talking about transport. So we haven't talked about anything in our skills of someone that knows the transport sector, knows how this might be, how are we going to integrate this across the bus company, the bus drivers, the signage on the bus. So I think maybe we need a kind of in with the location where we're expecting to deliver this, because that might also help us think of some new ways that we could apply it. And just a thought, Madeline, for you, because again, with something like this, where it's a kind of a whole cross-city project, have any examples come to mind or anything you've worked on where you've kind of found success in taking something small like this, a prototype that we've worked on, and actually getting it to a very large scale? Or do you have any thoughts on how people might kind of manage expectations about doing that? Because often when you get set a problem like this, you can see the solution and you're desperate to get it out there to everyone, but perhaps you need to be a bit realistic about it. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably really important to get someone involved who's like experienced in distribution and maybe like a tech, like some kind of startup company, right, who understands how you can start to get this kind of embedded in different kind of ways. But I mean, one that sticks out is someone actually mentioned it on Monday, but the Ask for Angela scheme, for example, like the way that's a very simple kind of sign, but it appears in lots of different places. So maybe like working with local businesses and stuff and schools, and just tapping into local networks rather than reinventing the wheel. How do you actually tap into existing networks to start to roll this out?
Yeah, really nice. Okay, and what I like about this is, again, it's that thing of also reflecting on the fact that we ourselves might be multidisciplinary and we're sort of bringing lots of different skills to the table, but actually some of the actions that we might apply will be very multidisciplinary as well. So it's about sort of, again, having enough freedom in our project plan that means that actually when we're consulting transport, business, education, community, we can empathize with them, we can relate to them, we can learn and perhaps change our plan based on what they might need or any feedback they have. So I think it's something in our action plan needs to be about coming back together as a group when we learn something new from those communities that we've consulted with, and sort of seeing how we might need to flex our plan a little in order to have room for that feedback. what else would be in terms of our action plan? So we know we've got our team. We know roughly that we're thinking about some sort of tech startup that might help us get this app off the ground. We've perhaps consulted with the transport company. What's our aspiration with this? Like, where do we see this going? Where's our big end goal? Like, individually, what do you think would be the end goal for our action plan that we want to see this alarm coming to life? Maybe Jenny, if you kick us off, your original idea, what would be your dream endpoint ambition for this?
Yeah, of course, to see a decrease in the number of like cases of women being like attacked and harassed, especially when they go back home after work or see a friend, and it always happens during the night. And I think this can be avoided. Even like a solution, when we were talking about this, I thought about how while we walk during, like, to everywhere, we just hold our phone like in our hand all the time. And this could be as simple as something like, I don't know, a button on the phone that could be like a quick solution to that. But I thought about it in terms of public transport, just because it's like a public space and we were talking about that. But yeah, at the end, goal would be to see a decrease in the number of women being harassed, because we're hearing about the case every other month, and it's just not right.
Yeah, I think it's clear also that a sort of end goal might be that this is really helpful tool for the emergency services, for the kind of local social services. You know, it could be something that's actually going to really help the individual people and also the organizations that are helping those people. Fantastic. And what I liked about what you said there as well was also you reflecting on, it's not just changing sort of infrastructure and process, it's actually changing behavior. You know, actually, I like that point that, you know, we do things to kind of protect ourselves, perhaps kind of subconsciously. And wouldn't it be wonderful if you could walk down the street without feeling like you needed to, you know, clutch your keys or, you know, have your best friend on speed dial, you know, actually feeling like you own the space and are free in that space. And that would ultimately change the feel of a urban center if more people felt kind of comfortable to be there.
Yeah, sure.
Brilliant.
That would be
Okay.
amazing.
Wouldn't it be amazing? So you know what we're doing with this, and thank you so much for being such willing participants, is we've just, you know, trying to understand how it is that you might first of all react to an urban urgent response team. Like, how would you immediately react? The very fact that we've all come from very different experiences and skill sets on paper, no one would put us together as a project team. But what we're hearing about from both Amica and David earlier as well is that actually it's really helpful to bring people with different skills together and to solve kind of traditional problems that's sitting in architecture, but we can open it up by all these different skills. And I want to just have a think now, Madeline, if we can kind of work together of if we were kind of pushing this idea of different skills and unlocking skills and how we might then apply that in other different sectors. How have you found it with the kind of work you're doing of kind of successfully unlocking skills and getting people working well together? You know, how would you see that kind of practically being applied?
Yeah, I suppose, sorry, just sort of going back one step. I actually think the kind of ambition of this should be that you no longer need to have these alarms. Like, this is almost like an interim measure. Yeah. But then in terms of like how we sort of work together, I think it's just so important to respect one another, take the time to understand what each other can contribute and what you can bring to the team.
Yeah. So sort of respecting, well, I think maybe it comes back to one of the points made earlier is there's a traditional sense of what an expert is. And of course, we want to respect everybody's skills, but perhaps it doesn't need to be defined by your job title, what you've sort of traditionally been asked to do in that job title. And actually that as a team, by respecting each other and drawing out these skills, collectively, you're going to be able to solve some of these problems in a more effective way. Which I think is a really interesting way of looking at it. And I think so many of the examples that we've had through this whole Creative Challenge series have really shown us that the whole notion of cities and place and community, it has to be a very kind of collective approach in order to solve some of these problems. We've talked a lot today about consulting directly with the community. We also learnt earlier this week that it's really important to also respect that community's time, and skills. And, you can't suddenly lump a challenge on a community and to say, right, you go ahead and solve it. Like they don't have the time to solve it. They've got their own lives. So it's about how to kind of respectfully, using Madeline, your term, respectfully consult those people and bring them in. Madeline, any final thoughts from you based on our conversation today? What's kind of come to your mind as something that might be a good takeaway?
I think, yeah, it's been fascinating. I just think these sessions, they just show you how there's always so much more to learn from one another, and the importance of really like having these multidisciplinary dialogues and not being too contained in our own little bubbles, and just what each the different ways, I suppose, that we each can think about the same issue. And we might have aligned goals and visions, but how we get there is really about how we all work together.
Yeah, it's a bit of a journey, and I think it's a bit, I think one of the ones that I find so helpful from some of the design thinking tools is this sort of notion of giving yourself permission to take a step out of how you've traditionally done things, or your assumptions, or the team you've always worked with, and really going out of your way to find other people to listen to, and other ways of trying new tools. I think everyone gets so busy, there's a lot of pressure, but actually it's really worthwhile time. Like even our time this morning, like we've all learned something new, we've all been inspired, and that is going to help with whatever you're doing next in the day and in your lives. So I think it is about that idea of permission and kind of protecting that creative process as well.
And having fun.
And having fun, for sure. Absolutely. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. As always, we're so delighted to be able to work with people and kind of get your ideas flowing. All of this is going to feed into these wider toolkits and videos that we'll be sharing with the whole community that are involved in these sessions. LSE Generate, LSE Cities, Manifesta, Aspect. There's so many people involved, and that really sort of demonstrates the value of using these kind of approaches and using cross-disciplinary thinking in order to solve challenges. We have one final session tomorrow with Dan Hill. Please do come along, you're very welcome. All the information is online from the same place that you signed up to today's session. Thank you so much for David and Madeline and Amica for all contributing to today's session, and for yourselves for being here. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.